The night is listening. Come closer, just a little. Pull your blanket up around your shoulders, and let the day go quiet. Whatever you were worried about, whatever felt too big or too loud today, set it down right here, at the edge of sleep. I will watch over it while you rest. My name, as you may already know, is Peter. And I have flown over a great many places in this wide and spinning world. I have seen cities that float on clouds and forests that hum like music boxes and rivers that run uphill on Tuesdays. But tonight I want to tell you about a small island far out at sea, where the wind always smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet, and where a boy named Cael kept something very unusual in his bedroom. Glass jars. Dozens of them. Stacked on shelves, lined along the windowsill, tucked beneath his bed and balanced on the corners of his desk. Each one sealed with a cork and a twist of dark wax. Each one glowing, ever so faintly, from the inside. Not with light, exactly. With weather. Are you curious? Good. So was I, the first time I passed by his window. Let me tell you everything. The island of Cael sat at the far western edge of the known maps. The kind of place that cartographers drew with slightly shaking hands and labeled simply "Here, the storms begin." It was not a large island. It had one market, one lighthouse, 2 bakers, who argued constantly about the proper way to make sea bread, and a population of fishermen, weavers, and one very puzzling boy. Cael was 11 years old, small for his age, with dark eyes that always seemed to be watching the sky. He lived with his grandmother, Nana Briggs, in a stone cottage at the top of a hill where the wind came from all 4 directions at once, and couldn't seem to decide which way it preferred. Nana Briggs was a woman of enormous practical sense who had long since stopped trying to explain her grandson to the neighbors and had instead simply started baking more biscuits whenever they came to complain. "He caught another one last night," old fisherman Drought would say, standing at her doorstep with his hat in his hands. "Would you like a biscuit, Drought?" Nana Briggs would reply. What Cael could do was this when a storm came rolling in off the sea, and the clouds turned the color of old iron, and the first crack of lightning split the sky in two, Cael would step outside with an empty glass jar, hold it up with both hands, and wait. And the storm would come to him. Not all of it. Just a piece. A miniature bolt of lightning no bigger than a candle flame. A spool of wind that spun and hummed against the glass, a small gray cloud no larger than his fist that produced, reliably, 3 drops of rain every hour. He did not know why he could do this. He had tried to explain it once to his teacher, a serious woman named Mistress Bell, who had listened politely and then suggested he spend more time on arithmetic. He had tried to explain it to his friend Paula, a cheerful girl with braided hair who lived near the docks. And she had said, very sincerely, that is the strangest and most wonderful thing I have ever heard, and then asked if she could hold one of the jars. "You can look," Cael had said carefully, "but not hold." Because here was the thing about the jars. The storms inside them were alive, in a way that Cael could feel but not quite describe. They pushed against the glass when he was upset. They brightened when he was happy. The one he had caught first, 3 years ago, during the great autumn gale that had snapped the lighthouse beacon clean off its post, glowed with a deep blue-purple light that Cael found deeply comforting, like a nightlight that also knew how you were feeling. He called that one oldest. It sat on the shelf directly above his pillow. The other children on the island were not, on the whole, very friendly about the jars. They called Cael Stormboy in a tone that was not meant kindly. They said his cottage smelled like rain. They said his jars would crack one day and the storms would get out and do terrible things. Once, a boy named Ferris had thrown a stone at Cael's bedroom window, and for 3 days afterward, the jars had glowed an agitated red-orange and the wind in the cottage had been particularly pointed. Cael tried not to mind. He was not very good at not minding, but he tried. What he was good at was watching the sky. He could read a storm the way some people read faces. He knew the difference between a rain that wanted to linger and a rain that was just passing through. He knew which clouds carried lightning and which ones were all noise and bluster and no real fire. He knew, somehow, when a storm was frightened. That was the part no one understood. Storms could be frightened. They could be lonely. They could be confused, caught between one's systems, spinning in circles because no one had shown them where to go. When Cael found a storm like that, he felt something tighten in his chest. A recognition he couldn't name, and he would hold up his jar and the storm would come to him like a bird that had finally found somewhere to land. The summer Cael turned 11, something changed. It began quietly, the way the most significant things always do. One morning in late June, Cael woke to find the sky an unusual color, not gray, not blue, but a pale and empty white, like a page that had been erased. He went to his window. The sea was flat. The wind was gone. Not still. Gone. By the end of the first week, the fishermen were muttering. By the end of the second week, the market was worried. By the end of the month, the word was moving through the island like a cold current beneath warm water. Drought. The wells were dropping. The gardens were yellowing at the edges. The two bakers had stopped arguing because there was nothing to argue cheerfully about. Even the seabirds had gone quiet, sitting in rows on the rooftops with their heads tilted, as if listening for something that wasn't coming. Cael sat on the hill outside his cottage each evening and watched the sky and felt, for the first time in his life, that the sky was not watching back. His jars were restless. All of them. Even oldest, his deepest and most steady companion, pulsed with a strange, urgent light that Cael had never seen before. He pressed his palm against the glass one night, and the storm inside pressed back, and Cael felt, with a certainty he could not explain, that the storms were not just restless. They were trying to tell him something. He just didn't know yet what it was. That night, after Nana Brix had gone to sleep and the cottage was quiet and the pale blank sky offered nothing but silence, Cael lay in his bed with his eyes open. Surrounded by the soft irregular glow of dozens of captured storms, and felt something shift in the very deep part of himself. Where feelings lived before they became words. Something was wrong with the island. And somehow, in some way he couldn't yet see clearly, it had something to do with him. And there, in that quiet cottage on the hill, with the wells dropping and the sky gone, pale and empty, a boy who had always collected storms began to wonder for the first time whether he had been collecting them for a reason. But that is a question for deeper in the night. We are only just beginning. Close your eyes if you'd like. Let the words carry you. I will still be here, just at the edge of the dark, making sure the way is lit. The dream came 3 nights in a row. It was always the same. Cael stood at the center of the island, in the place where the old maps marked nothing at all, a circle of bare rock at the highest point of the inland hills that the villagers called the Crown. In the dream the Crown was surrounded by a wall of silent weather, clouds that did not move, lightning that did not strike, rain, frozen in the air like a curtain of glass beads, and at the center of it all, where Cael stood, there was nothing, no wind, no sound. Not even the feeling of air moving in and out of his lungs, just stillness. He woke each morning with his jars blazing. On the 4th day, Cael told Nana Brix about the dream. She listened without interrupting, which was how he knew she was taking it seriously. She was quiet for a long time after he finished. Then she poured him the second cup of tea he hadn't asked for, which was how he knew she was worried. "The crown," she said finally, turning the word over as if feeling its weight. "Your grandfather went up there once. Said the rock was warm even in winter. Said it felt like something was sleeping underneath." "What kind of something?" Cael asked. Nana Brix looked at him steadily. "The old kind," she said. "The kind that was here before the island had a name." That afternoon, Cael packed a canvas bag with 2 empty jars, a canteen of water, and 3 of Nana Brix's biscuits, which were reliable in emergencies. He told her he was going to the crown. She did not try to stop him. She only pressed her hand briefly to the top of his head, the way she did when she wanted to say something she didn't have words for yet, and then she went back to her bread. Paula was waiting at the bottom of the hill. "I knew you'd go today," she said. She was carrying her own small pack. "I'm coming." Cael considered arguing. He was not very good at arguing with Paula. "It might be dangerous," he said. "I know," she said, and started walking. The path to the crown wound up through the dry center of the island, past fields that had gone brown and brittle, past a stream that was now only a pale suggestion of where water used to be, past the old stone wall that marked the boundary of what the villagers called the known part of the island, beyond which children were traditionally discouraged from wandering. As they climbed, Cael felt it, a pressure, low and constant, like the feeling before a storm, but inverted somehow, as if instead of weather gathering it was weather being held back. The air tasted flat and stale, the light looked wrong, too bright and too still at the same time, like sunlight pressing through thick glass. His bag felt heavier. He checked it twice. Nothing had changed. It was the jars. They were pulling, faintly, the way a compass needle pulls north, oriented toward something ahead that Cael couldn't see yet. They reached the crown as the sun began its slow western tilt. It was exactly as it appeared in his dreams, a wide circle of bare pale rock at the island's highest point, the ground smooth and unmarked, the stone beneath their feet faintly, unmistakably warm. The view from here was the entire island spread below them, and the sea beyond, and the sky above, and all of it bleached and still and silent. At the center of the crown, there was a crack in the rock. It was not large, no wider than Cael's hand, running in a jagged line perhaps 2 arm lengths across the pale stone, but from it came nothing, not cold air, not warm air, not the smell of deep earth, nothing at all. The absence of it was the loudest thing Cael had ever not heard. He knelt beside the crack and pressed his ear close to the stone. Paula crouched beside him, silent, watching, and then he felt it, something immense, something old, something that had been pressed down into the rock so long ago that it had forgotten the shape it used to have, and had simply become pressure, become waiting, become the slow and terrible patience of a thing that has nowhere to go. It was not a storm, exactly, it was what a storm becomes when it is not allowed to be a storm, when it is sealed away and told to be still and left alone in the dark for so long, that the wanting to move and the not being allowed to move become the same unbearable thing. Cael pulled back from the crack and sat down hard on the warm stone. "What is it?" Paula whispered. He searched for words. "It is a storm," he said slowly, "that has forgotten how to storm." He opened his bag and took out Oldest. In the afternoon light the jar's deep blue-violet glow was barely visible, but he could feel it pulsing against his palms like a second heartbeat. He held it close to the crack in the rock. The reaction was immediate. The storm inside Oldest blazed. Every other jar in his bag blazed with it. The crack in the rock emitted a sound so low Cael felt it in his back teeth rather than heard it. A resonance. A recognition, as if something that had been utterly alone for a very long time had suddenly become aware that it was not alone anymore. Cael's eyes filled with tears. He was not entirely sure why, but he understood, with the bone-deep certainty that his gift sometimes gave him, what he was feeling was not his own sadness. It was the storm's. "It has been here since before the island had a name," he said quietly, half to Paula and half to himself. It was sealed here, I don't know by whom, I don't know why, but it has been here all this time, and it has been pressing outward, and everything that should have fallen as rain, everything that should have moved and turned and blown through, has been held back by whatever is keeping it in. Paula was very still. The drought, she said. The drought, Cael agreed. So you have to open it. Cael looked down at Oldest in his hands, the jar that had been with him the longest, the first storm he had ever caught, the one that had found him before he even knew he could find storms, glowing against his palms on a dark hilltop 3 years ago, when he was 8 and frightened and the whole world felt too large and too loud and the storm had come to him like a friend. He had named it Oldest because it was the oldest part of himself that he trusted. To release what was in the rock, he understood now with a clarity that felt like cold water on his face, he would have to open all his jars. Every storm he had ever gathered, he would have to give them back. They would join the great sealed thing beneath the crown, and together they would be enough. Enough weight, enough wildness, enough collected wanting to move, to break whatever seal had been placed on that ancient sleeping storm. But it meant letting go of Oldest, it meant letting go of all of them. Cael sat on the warm stone at the top of the island with Oldest glowing in his hands and the crack in the rock humming its low ancient note beneath him, and for the first time in his life he understood that there are things you can hold on to so tightly, for such good reasons, with such genuine love, that the holding itself becomes the problem. He was not ready, not yet. The sun was sliding toward the sea. Paula sat beside him without speaking, which was one of the best things about Paula, and the jars in his bag pulsed their many colors against the fading light, and below them the island waited, dry and patient and desperately, quietly thirsty. Cael did not sleep that night. He lay in his bed with all his jars around him, their light painting the ceiling in slow-moving color, and he thought about holding on. He thought about the first time he had caught Oldest, standing on the hill in the dark at 8 years old. Soaking wet and laughing because the storm had come to him like it knew him, like it had been looking for him specifically among all the people on all the islands and all the world. He thought about how the weight of that jar in his hands had felt like being told, for the first time, that he was exactly right. That the thing that made him strange was also the thing that made him necessary. He thought about all the others. The quicksilver one he had caught during a sea squall when he was 9, so fast and bright it had seemed almost playful. The deep green one from the mountain storm that groaned and rumbled and smelled of pine and cold earth. The small pale one from the cloud that had wandered away from its storm family and seemed, Cael had always felt, a little lost. He had kept them safe. He had given them a place to be. But sometime deep in the night, in the quiet space between one breath and the next, a different thought came to him. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just quiet and clear, the way the truest thoughts often are. What if keeping them safe and keeping them was not the same thing? He was still holding that thought in his hands, turning it over, when the first gray light of morning came through his window. He got up. He dressed. He put every jar carefully into his bag, all of them, even Oldest, and he went downstairs. Nana Bricks was already in the kitchen. She took one look at his face and his bag and said nothing at all. She simply handed him a biscuit, kissed the top of his head, and opened the back door. Paula was waiting at the bottom of the hill again. She had not brought a pack this time. She seemed to understand that this was not a journey that needed provisions. They walked to the crown in the early morning light. And the island around them was so dry and so still that their footsteps sounded too loud, like walking through a held breath. When they reached the crown, Cael set his bag down beside the crack in the rock and knelt. The warm stone met his knees. The low ancient hum was there, as it had been, patient as a heartbeat. He opened his bag. He took out oldest last. He held the jar in both hands for a long moment, feeling its pulse against his palms. Looking at the deep blue-violet light that had watched over him through 3 years of storms and loneliness. And the particular difficulty of being a boy who was not quite like other boys. He thought of everything it had been to him. Not a tool. Not a curiosity. A companion. "Thank you," he said quietly. He was not sure if he was talking to the storm inside the jar or to the part of himself that had needed it. Perhaps both. Perhaps they had always been the same thing. He pulled the cork. The storm came out like a held breath released. Not violently. Gently. A spiral of blue-violet light that rose from the jar and hung in the air for just a moment. Luminous and turning, and then sank down into the crack in the rock like water finding its level. Cael opened the next jar. And the next. One by one he pulled the corks. The quicksilver one spun out in a bright helix and dove into the stone. The deep green mountain storm rolled out slowly, smelling of pine, and settled. The small pale lost cloud drifted down last of all, and Cael watched it go with a particular tenderness, hoping wherever it ended up it would feel less alone. With each jar the hum from the crack grew. Not louder, exactly. Fuller. As if something that had been a single thin note was becoming a chord, gathering harmonics, finding its full resonance after a very long silence. When the last jar was empty, Cael sat back on his heels. His bag was full of nothing but glass and air. He had expected to feel empty. He did not feel empty. He felt, strangely and specifically, lighter. Paula reached over and took his hand. She didn't say anything. She was very good at not saying anything at exactly the right moments. They felt it before they heard it. A deep shudder in the rock beneath them, traveling up through their knees, through their spines. Arriving at the base of the throat is a kind of vibration that was almost a sound and almost a feeling and almost neither. The crack in the stone widened by a hair. Then by a little more. Then the sky changed. Not gradually. All at once, the way a face changes when a person finally stops pretending to be fine. The flat white emptiness fractured. The first cloud appeared at the horizon, small and dark and purposeful, moving with an intention that clouds on this island had not had in a very long time. Then another. Then a dozen. Then the sky was full of them, rolling in from every direction, gathering over the crown the way a crowd gathers when something important is about to happen. The wind returned. It came back not as a gale but as a greeting, a long exhale moving through the dry grasses, lifting Paula's braids, pressing warm and real against Cael's face. He closed his eyes and turned into it the way he always had, reading it the way he knew how, and what he felt in it was not a storm in distress. Not a storm that was frightened or lonely or confused. What he felt was joy. The first drop of rain hit the back of his hand. He opened his eyes and looked at it. One small dark circle on his skin, perfectly ordinary, the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen. Then another on his shoulder. Then on the stone around him, appearing one by one and then faster, the percussion of it. Building from a whisper to a murmur to a full and generous drumming, and Cael sat in the middle of it all and let it soak into his hair and run down his face, and he did not try to catch a single drop. Below them, the island was drinking. Paula stood up and spread her arms wide and tilted her face to the sky and laughed, and her laugh mixed with the rain and the wind and became part of the weather of that day. In a way that Cael thought she probably didn't realize, but that he would remember for the rest of his life. He looked down at the empty jar in his hands. Oldest. Nothing left in it now but air and a faint residue of violet light along the inside of the glass, like the memory of a color. He thought it was the most beautiful thing he had ever held. He put it carefully back in his bag. He would keep the jars. Not to fill them again, but perhaps someday he would find a storm that needed a place to rest and he would be there with an open jar and an open hand. But he would keep them because they had been real, and the things that have been real deserve to be remembered. He stood up. The rain came down around him, warm and steady and long overdue, and Cael, the boy who had collected storms, stood in the middle of one he had finally let go, and found that he was not less for the letting go. He was more. And so, the rains came back to Cael Moran. The wells filled. The gardens came green again. The two bakers resumed their argument about sea bread, which everyone agreed was a good sign. And on the hill above the village, in a stone cottage, a boy kept a shelf of empty jars that glowed, very faintly, with the memory of weather. The people of the island never quite understood what had happened. They said it was the season changing. They said it was luck. Some of the older ones said it was the old kind of magic, the kind that doesn't announce itself. They were closest, I think. Now, it is late, and the night is deep and soft around you, and I have one last thing to say before I go. You have things you hold on to too. Everyone does. Old hurts, old worries, old pieces of yourself that felt like safety once. And holding on is not wrong. Sometimes you need to hold on for a while. Sometimes a storm needs a jar before it is ready to be sky again. But when the time comes, and you will know when it comes, you can let it go. And you will not be empty. You will be lighter. You will be more. Sweet dreams, and I will see you at the next window.